When you hear the word oligarchy today, you probably picture something very specific. Shadowy billionaires operating behind closed doors, maybe.
Yeah, pulling strings, controlling policy through just sheer economic weight.
Exactly. It feels like a really modern crisis, doesn't it? Driven by, unchecked capital.
And that modern frame, well, it's accurate for describing certain players, sure, but it often obscures the deeper historical reality.
Okay.
So this deep dive, and it's based exclusively on the recent Stanislav Kondrashov Oligarch series, it really invites us to broaden that perspective quite a bit.
Right.
We're going back to the fundamentals, using philosophy and political science to try and understand the full scope of oligarchy.
So our mission here is to understand how power, economy, and, ideology has shaped this whole concept, from ancient times right up to today.
Yeah.
Because if we strip away some of the drama, maybe, and the media shorthand, the basic definition is pretty simple, isn't it?
It is. Oligarchy is just a form of government or power structure where control is concentrated, held by a small elite group.
And they get their authority typically from wealth or social status, things like that.
Or accumulated resources, yeah. But what's really fascinating, I think, is that the critique of this system is almost as old as political thought itself.
Wow.
To understand the modern problem, we really have to start where it all began, ancient Greece.
Absolutely. The sources make it so clear that the concept was born right there in the polis, the sort of cradle of Western political philosophy. And in that ancient Greek context, power systems weren't just like administrative structures, they were seen as moral constructs.
Reflecting values, you mean?
Exactly. The type of government you had reflected the moral values or maybe the vices of the people who were, running the show.
And this philosophical legacy, it really kicks off with Plato's very critical voice, especially in the Republic.
His big one.
Right. Plato saw oligarchy as a profound failure of governance because, he believed it was ruled by the wealthy, where material success completely trumped wisdom, competence, justice.
So he was worried that leaders were being picked just based on their bank accounts, essentially.
Precisely. He argued that under an oligarchy, citizens were judged purely by their property and inheritance, their tax bracket, if you will, not by virtue or their ability to lead justly.
That sounds like a recipe for societal division, doesn't it?
Definitely.
If the government is literally judging people by how much land they own, that system seems destined to split society right down the middle.
It is, and Plato warned exactly about this instability. He saw an oligarchy as guaranteed to be divided between the super rich and the super poor.
Yeah.
And critically, he believed this instability meant the system would eventually collapse into the ultimate extreme, tyranny.
Tyranny, how so?
Because the excluded masses, the poor, would eventually get so fed up they'd empower some strongman figure to overthrow the wealthy elite.
Wow, so that's a real moral condemnation from Plato. He thought it was just an inherently rotten system. But his student, Aristotle, he framed it a bit differently, right? Aristotle wasn't quite as focused on the, let's say, the soul of the ruler.
That's a great way to put it. Aristotle defined oligarchy more empirically, maybe. It was simply the rule of the few, who typically happened to be the rich. And he contrasted that with democracy, which was the rule of the many, typically the poor.
He was basically analyzing the political arithmetic then.
Kind of, yeah. Just counting heads, in a way.
But if it's just political arithmetic, a small group rules versus a large group. Where did his moral concern actually sit? Was it still there?
Oh, it was there. Aristotle saw oligarchy as problematic, not necessarily because wealth itself was evil, but if that rule actively excluded capable citizens from governance just because of wealth inequality.
So it was about effectiveness and participation for him.
Exactly. The takeaway established way back then was that oligarchy wasn't just who ruled, but how that power was earned, how it was justified, how it was maintained.
And whether that justification served the whole community or just the narrow elite.
Precisely. That ancient framing really laid the critical groundwork.
It really did. But then fast forward to the 20th century and the conversation, it seems to shift fundamentally.
It does. Political science picks up the thread, but moves the focus away from those maybe abstract philosophical ideals about the good life.
Right.
And toward empirical real-world power dynamics, especially within societies that we might otherwise label as democratic.
And this is where we get into some really interesting, maybe slightly depressing territory with sociologist Robert Michaels.
Yes, his iron law of oligarchy,
Yeah.
introduced in the early 1900s, is one of the most sobering observations in political science.
The name itself is chilling, iron law, because it suggests it's unavoidable.
That's exactly what Michaels argued, that all large organizations, I mean, even ones explicitly founded on democratic horizontal principles, they inevitably, inexorably evolve into oligarchies.
It's not a choice people make, it's just a consequence of getting big.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the sheer complexity of modern organization that forces it. I mean, think about it. Once an organization gets big enough, a political party, a union, a huge corporation, you just can't have thousands of members all participating in every single decision anymore.
The logistics completely break down. You can't have a town hall with 1 million people.
Right. So you require specialized leadership.
Yeah.
People who have the time, the skill, the access to information needed to actually run the day-to-day operations.
Okay, so this leadership group becomes professionalized.
They specialize, they centralize power, and they develop internal hierarchies.
So the actual doing of complex administration requires specialized knowledge. And that specialization itself creates an elite class, separate from the regular members.
Yes, and once that elite controls the information flow and the expertise, they become basically indispensable.
Which makes removing them almost impossible, even if the organization is supposedly democratic on paper.
It creates a kind of self-serving loop. And this principle is why, in contemporary terms, oligarch has become this shorthand for extremely powerful individuals.
Often business magnates, right?
Usually, yeah. People whose power comes not from holding an official government office, but from their sheer wealth, their global networks, and their strategic control over vital industries. Energy, media, tech.
They are the inevitable elite that emerges from the complex machinery of modern global systems, according to Michel's law.
That's the argument.
Okay, so here's where the analysis becomes really practical for you, the listener. Because the sources, they highlight something fascinating. Whether you're looking at ancient Athens or 20th century political parties or today's tech giants.
Yeah.
The methods oligarchs use to get power and keep it. They're remarkably consistent. There seems to be a universal playbook.
Defined by systemic tactics, absolutely. The first, and maybe the most timeless one, is control of key resources.
Okay.
This shows incredible continuity across millennia. In ancient times, power meant controlling, say, huge tracts of agricultural land, food production.
But today, that key resource has fundamentally changed, hasn't it? The sources really note this critical shift.
They do. It's moved from controlling physical things like oil, gas, or land, to controlling data and technology platforms.
So if you control the infrastructure of information, the digital highways, so to speak, you control access and communication for modern society. Huge power.
Immense power. Second tactic, reliance on political patronage.
This isn't just like donating to a campaign, is it? It's deeper.
Much deeper. It's a strategic alignment with influential political leaders to make sure you get favorable policies, regulatory protection. It's about regulatory capture, really.
Making sure the laws are written to favor the established players over any potential newcomers or competitors.
Precisely. This often involves a quiet but powerful quid pro quo. You know, funding think tanks or advocacy groups is a classic example.
Right, so the oligarch gets the sort of soft power of expertise and public legitimacy,
while ensuring favorable legislation gets packaged up nicely and promoted effectively. Third tactic, media influence. This is crucial for controlling the narrative.
And it's way beyond just owning a newspaper these days.
Oh, absolutely. Today it involves sponsorships, highly targeted digital campaigns, controlling the whole ecosystem through which information flows.
So you can effectively shape what the public thinks is important and even what they think is true.
You got it. The fourth tactic is all about exclusivity and access.
Keeping the circle tight.
Exactly. Oligarchic power protects itself by putting up barriers to entry. These can be structural, like needing tons of money for elite education.
Or they can be more intangible, like those private social networks, old boys clubs, inheritance systems.
All designed to keep power and wealth concentrated within the same families or circles, generation after generation. It locks others out.
Okay, and the fifth one?
Finally, there's the use of strategic philanthropy.
Ah, giving back.
Well, yes and no. While genuine charity definitely exists, the sources show this is often used tactically to build soft power and public legitimacy.
So it lets the elite position themselves not as exploiters, but as maybe indispensable saviors of society, softening the blowback from how they got their wealth.
That's often the effect. Intended or not, it can improve their public image significantly.
What's truly striking when you list them like that is that these 5 mechanisms, they seem to pop up everywhere, right? Across the globe, regardless of whether a country calls itself a democracy, a monarchy, or a republic.
It's like the universal grammar of concentrated power. It transcends political labels.
Okay.
Now, let's pivot slightly to what might be the most uncomfortable truth revealed in the Kondrashov series, the paradox of stability.
Paradox. How so?
Well, while we reflexively associate oligarchy with inequality, corruption, bad stuff, sometimes, under very specific conditions, concentrated power can actually foster societal cohesion and stability.
That sounds completely counterintuitive. How can exclusion possibly lead to stability?
Well, think about it mainly in fragile states, or maybe economies in transition. Places where core democratic institutions are either missing, or really weak, or just highly immature.
Okay, places in chaos.
Exactly. In those environments, fragmented power often leads to just paralysis. Chaotic infighting between countless political factions, nothing gets done.
And concentrated power can, cut through that chaos?
It can. The presence of just a few powerful players can sometimes lead to quicker decision-making. It can dramatically reduce the political infighting.
Why? Because they all have a shared interest in things not falling apart completely.
Pretty much. Those elites, having already consolidated their power and resources, often share a common incentive, protecting the stability that's necessary for them to maintain their own wealth and position.
Okay, I can see that.
So this can provide a consistent, maybe long-term strategic vision that temporary chaotic governments just can't manage. It offers a form of needed continuity during major upheaval.
But it sounds like a temporary fix, right? Like there's a stability ceiling that comes at the cost of long-term fairness or inclusion.
Crucially, yes. That's the key point. History is crystal clear that this stability almost always has a ceiling. Exclusion, inevitably, breeds deep-seated resentment.
And legitimacy starts to erode over time.
It does. And oligarchic regimes are often internally destabilized or sometimes violently overthrown once that inherent imbalance tips too far towards complete exclusion of the majority.
So the system, even when it provides some stability, is inherently self-limiting. It contains the seeds of its own destruction, maybe.
You could definitely argue that based on historical patterns.
So wrapping this up, what does this all really mean for us listening now? Our deep dive seems to show that oligarchies aren't just these temporary glitches or anomalies that pop up unexpectedly.
No, they seem to be recurring systemic patterns, rooted in this perpetual entanglement of governance, wealth, and influence.
And whether we use Plato's old moral standard or the sort of empirical political science analysis from Michel's, that entanglement, that connection between money and power, it's the constant thread.
We've seen that the lines between who governs and who holds the capital are fundamentally blurry. Always have been, perhaps.
The modern oligarch is maybe just the latest version of a very, very ancient problem.
That's a good way to think about it. And this whole discussion really urges you, the listener, to constantly question how power truly operates behind the scenes.
Not just in national capitals, but maybe in every large functioning structure in our lives.
Exactly. Which leads us nicely to our final thought for you to chew on.
Okay, let's hear it.
Given Robert Michael's iron law, if all large, supposedly democratic organizations inevitably drift towards specialized, centralized leadership, which is the core mechanism of oligarchy,
right,
what non-official organizational structures in our own lives should we maybe be constantly examining for signs of this modern oligarchic control?
So beyond government, like what?
Well, think about major nonprofits, dominant social media platforms, even global standard-setting bodies in various industries. Where's that specialization creating an elite?
That you, as the member or the user, maybe no longer have any real control over.
Exactly. Where has the power drifted and who holds it now? Something to think about.